Hello, my good Thaleans. A little bit late, but this is your November live reading. I certainly hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving. I certainly am thankful for all of you. And since my Thalean group comprises only one person, I am very grateful for you, Tim. Very, very grateful indeed. Well, I'm experimenting with a new lighting method here, looking a bit upwards. There is abysmal lighting in here, even for a very sophisticated iPhone. And, well, I just can't bring myself to buy a video camcorder. There's too many other expenditures that I dare not take money from, or rather, funds that I dare not take money from at this time, and video cameras have gotten ridiculously expensive. But without further ado, here is the story. I hope one that you do enjoy. I certainly enjoyed reading it. I almost wanted to do it for the channel, but I sort of wanted to be exclusive for Patreon. You know, I do like doing exclusive content, even if it kills me, even if it's absolutely detrimental. But this story is titled "The Train I'm On Hasn't Stopped Driving for 17 Days" by Richard Saxon. Almost said Richard Nixon. I jolted back to consciousness by a violent... Great, missed the first word. I was jolted back to consciousness by a violent coughing fit caused by the unnaturally dry air around me. Drops of sweat had piled up and started trickling down my forehead. It was dark, not a single ray of light to even make out my closest surroundings. My mom served me little to help in the My memory served little to help me recognizing my whereabouts, but upon fumbling around with my weak hands, I noticed I was sitting on a fabric coat chair in some room that seemed to vibrate ever so slightly. As my eyes started to adapt to the overwhelming darkness, sound effects provided you by Danielson, I could start making out the vague shape of my room. There were 3 seats facing each other with windows on the right-hand side, though they had revealed nothing more than an empty void on the other side. On the other side was a door with a small window, which led into a hallway, and then it dawned on me where I had woken up. I hate grammar. It should have been a separate sentence which led into the hallway, period, and then it dawned on me, but they put a fucking comma. It's a good story, though, I will say that. Just a fucking moron for an author. But it's good. It was a train compartment, and the train was still moving, though seemingly rid of any other people. I tried to get up, but my legs refused to properly cooperate. They were too weak, as if I hadn't been using them in days. Then, some of my memories began to return. I was traveling. I remember getting on the train, though I hadn't the faintest idea what my destination should have been. My memory simply cut short after stepping inside my empty compartment. That had been it, and that had been November 12th. I checked my pockets to look for clues. I found my phone, which had long since run out of power, my wallet, and though it contained a ticket in the dark, it looked just like weird scribbles on a piece of paper. With an incredible amount of effort, I finally managed to get my legs working enough to stand up. Though I had to use the wall as my support, it was enough to move around, and I soon stumbled into the hallway of my train car. I took a moment to look through the windows in the hallway, and the world outside was empty. It both looked and felt as if nothing existed outside the boundaries of the train. The darkness made it hard to navigate without falling to the ground. I tried to look for a light switch, or at the very least another person to help me out, but neither were in sight. I peeked in through the window in the next compartment, and I could see the vague shape of people sitting in their seats, but but upon trying to enter, I realized that the door was locked. I tried to knock, but the people on the other side didn't even flinch. When I tried to call out for them, I realized my voice had almost completely vanished, replaced by just a whisper. I made my way from compartment to compartment, and while they all seemed to be occupied, none would open, and not a single person responded to my increasingly frantic knocks. As I reached the last compartment of the car, the train turned ever so slightly on its tracks, enough to knock me to the ground. While I lay there, I tried to call for help, but with my barely audible voice, no one could hear me. I got to my feet, but the train still turned, and noticed the door to the last compartment slowly glide open from the turn. "Hello? Can anyone help me?" I called out with a trembling voice as I approached the open door. No response, either because the compartment was empty or because my voice hadn't been used in so long that it barely functioned. I'm not going to imitate that or lose my voice today because I have a damn bit more reading to do. I slowly peeked my head around the corner to see the compartment fully occupied by dark figures. All of them were sitting perfectly still in their seats. "Hello," I said again. I took a step inside. My eyes had started to fully adjust to my dark surroundings, and I quickly realized that they were not the only people sitting perfectly still, but they weren't even breathing. The horrible thought of them being dead struck me like a hammer, but I had to make sure. I bent down on my knees next to the closest man and shook him gently. Still, he didn't respond. Then I checked for a pulse, and though I'm not a doctor, I couldn't find any signs of life. Then I heard a small beep that shot me to my feet, and I looked down to see that a man was wearing a digital watch that had alerted him to an hour that had passed. I looked at the watch and noticed the date was also written in the corner. 29th of November. November is past and gone but a few days since. It had been 17 days since I boarded the train. With a trembling hand, I checked for the rest of the people and for signs of life. All of them were beyond a shadow of a doubt dead. Panic arose in my body, both from the presence of fear, both from the presence of the dead people and from the realization that I'd been asleep on a moving train for more than 2 weeks. I collapsed to the ground in front of one of the dead passengers. She was an elderly woman, dressed up elegantly with wide-open, piercing blue eyes. I didn't want to stay in that compartment with them, but I was paralyzed by the lack of a plan. There I sat, surrounded by 6 dead people, trying to contemplate my next step. The train was still moving, which clearly meant that someone had been in control of it and was still in control of it. A conductor, or at least someone with an idea of what the hell was going on. So, I decided that my best bet would be to make my way to the locomotive and pray that not everyone had died on the train. All the while these thoughts ran through my head, I couldn't take my eyes off the elderly lady. Something just felt off about their presence. Firstly, there wasn't any smell, meaning that they hadn't started to decompose. And secondly, all of them had their eyes open wider than I thought possible. Before I could consider the bizarre situation any further, the woman suddenly blinked. I shot to my feet in horror, and she blinked again. I double-checked her pulse. Still nothing. Yet her eyes kept blinking without any other signs of life. If someone had kicked in, I noticed a chunk of wood missing from the door, as if someone had kicked it in, leaving it unable to properly close. As I slowly backed away from the compartment, I glimpsed out through the window into the empty void beyond. I humored the thought that we might have been driving through a wind tunnel, but if so, how long could that have possibly been? I stepped into the next train car. Unlike the previous one, it wasn't divided into compartments, but rather filled with rows of seats split in the middle by a central passage. But like the compartments, each seat was occupied by a seemingly dead passenger, each blinking in response as I quickly passed in panic. I walked through about 15 such cars, each alternating by rows of seats and compartments of seats. I felt like hours had passed, and I made my way to the... I felt like hours had passed as I made my way toward the locomotive, and just as I was about to enter through the door marked First Class, I was shoved to the floor by someone holding a bright light in my face. Stay the fuck down! Not you, them! Not you, them! A deep voice shouted at me. Speechless, I could do nothing but comply with the man in front of me. Wait, you're not dead? The man asked. As I realized I was basically just a kid, barely in my 20s, he moved the light away from me and reached out a hand to help me up. I'm sorry. I just heard someone moving and thought you were one of them, he said as he pointed to the lifeless people sitting idly by their seats. What's your name? I asked. I'm Thomas, I stuttered. As the shock from the bright light faded, I saw that the man was dressed in a police uniform, well-built and bald. The name's John Hendricks, he said, and we had better get out of here before these bastards wake up again. They're not dead? I asked. Yeah, well, not exactly. It's like they're in hibernation or some shit. I looked at him in confusion. People in hibernation? They ain't people, kid. As he spoke these words, he seemed surprised by something behind me. Fuck, I was too slow, he said, oddly calm. I turned around to see the people moving, their heads around, all of them staring directly up at us, their eyes now fixed and unblinking. We need to get the hell out of here, John said as he pulled my arm and dragged me through the door to another compartment car, though far nicer than the one I'd awoken in. All the doors had opened, and people were slowly piling out from each compartment into the hallway, staring at us with their wide eyes. We dove into the first available compartment, and the officer pushed out one of the people from it and then locked the door. He sighed. We'll be safe in here for a bit, hopefully because they're just scouting. What the hell is... I started to say before the cop put his hand over my mouth, gesturing me to keep quiet. Keep it down, would you? He said quietly, clearly agitated by my idiocy. What's happening? I whispered. We've got to hold up in here until they go back to sleep, that's what's happening. He stood up and peeked out of the window into the hallway before quickly pulling me back down behind cover. The other passengers, what's happened to them, I said. Dead. Most of them anyways. Got a few survivors camped up in the dining car. I just came back from there to look for batteries, hoping we could find a phone or something to get help. How the hell did you survive here all the way down by yourself? I don't know. I just woke up an hour ago, I said. I took out the ticket from my pocket and tried to read it. Officer Hendricks took his flashlight and set it down, and set it to its lowest setting to help me read. The text on the ticket was in a language I didn't recognize, just a jumbled set of symbols and a date. Yeah, it's the same with all our tickets as well. None of this makes any damn sense. Do you remember where the train is going? I asked. He shook his head. The people out there seem fairly docile. Can't we just push our way through and then seem to be moving? I asked. He sighed again. I'm not afraid of the things out there. It's what comes next that terrifies me. What's that? Hell, I don't even know what it really looks like. All we know is that it's just massive and dark. It just uses those things to look around for survivors. We call them survivors. I tried to finish the sentence, but a large thud. As I tried to finish the sentence, a large thud could be heard on the outside of the other side of the door. I carefully peeked out through the window to see that all the people had collapsed back to the ground, and that the door leading to the car behind us had opened up. A tall obsidian black. Misspelled word there. A tall obsidian black creature pulled its way inside using large tendril-like appendages. It had long, thin stumps that resembled legs and multiple more tendrils that slithered out along the walls, seeming to sense its surroundings. Though it was vaguely humanoid in nature, it did not have a head, nor any eyes. John lifted a finger to his lip and signaled for me to keep absolutely silent. I noticed that he had a gun holstered, attached to his belt. I pointed to it without saying a word, but he just shook his head in response. The creature moved closer, and before it was standing just outside the door. Its arms spread out, flattened out and covering up the window. It started to form small cracks then in the glass pane, allowing more small tendrils to seep through. "God damn it," John whispered as a sweat poured down his face. Suddenly, he stood up and kicked the door, breaking it straight off at the hinges. This barely fazed the creature, but it allowed for enough time for us to wriggle the bolt past. He grabbed me and pushed me through the gap between the wall and the creature, getting caught up in the tendrils as he did. They latched onto him and buried themselves in his leg. "Run!" he yelled in agony as he tried to fight off the tendrils wrapping around him. Oh God, that was the end of it. Let me reread that line so it is more impactful. He grabbed me and pushed me through the gap between the wall and the creature, getting caught up in the tendrils as he did. They latched onto him and buried it. I keep fucking this up. Let's go back a little bit farther. Suddenly he stood up and kicked the door, breaking it straight off at the hinges. It barely fazed this creature, but it allowed enough time for us to wriggle through. But it allowed us for enough wiggle room. Keep fucking that word up. But it allowed for us enough wiggle room to bolt past it. He grabbed me and pushed me through the gap between the wall and the creature, getting caught up in its tendrils as he did. They latched onto him and buried themselves into his leg. "Run!" he yelled in agony as he tried to fight off the tendrils wrapping around him. That's a bit more cinematic, friends. Well, I must say that was a good story. I really wanted to be more. So we got this train. Oh, it's a series. Well, that's nice. It's a series. So this is the first part of this series. That's good. Well, I do hope you enjoyed your November live read. My apologies that it was a bit late. The trouble about the last 3 months of the year, the last quarter of the year, October, November, and December, is that there's so much holiday activity on my channel and on social media, not to mention, obviously, my family and my responsibilities, that I just struggle to get out all the content. And I can't I would like to, ideally what I would like to do is I would like to spend the first week of every month getting nothing but the Patreon content uploaded. But the fact of the matter remains is I just don't receive enough Patreon support to justify that. I literally get 7 times the income on YouTube that I do on Patreon. And until Patreon equals or overcomes YouTube, I simply can't justify putting a vastly lower sum of income ahead of one that pays more. I love Patreon. It puts me in touch with fans in a better way, but only a handful of fans. And I must put my energies where the bias is, unfortunately. And add to this the fact that at the holiday season, I'm busy with holiday duties. I have an enormous amount to read, more so than usual, just simply because it's a better time of year. I stand to earn a great deal more money, and whatnot. So the Patreon rewards will be a little late. Some of them, not all of them. Most of them will be on time, but some of them will be a little late because I'm genuinely squeezing them around things. And of course, the almighty thing, which I don't want to jinx, but SICK. I don't want to get that, but if I do get that, then that adds an enormous complication into things, even more so than just all of the busyness and being tired and my immune system low and all of that. But I will be getting on to December matters. Your December Thalean vlog is coming. I thank you for this Thanksgiving, and I hope you had a wonderful one, and I shall see you next month.